Historical evidence indicates that many cultures have engaged in the removal of body parts from their dead or sometimes even alive enemies. The act of scalping includes removal of all or part of the scalp, with hair attached from an enemy's head. Scalps were sometimes taken as trophies to demonstrate bravery as symbols of revenge, or as part of spiritual or ceremonial practices. While there's proof of scalping dating as far as 5,000 years ago here, we're going to focus on the history of scalping in North America and the significance this act held. One of the earliest examples of scalping dates back to the Mesolithic period, found at a hunter-gatherer cemetery in Sweden. Several human remains from the Stone Age Urbo culture in Denmark show evidence of scalping. A man found in a grave in Sweden had been scalped approximately 5,000 years ago. There are also scalping examples in China. Around the same period, scalping was practiced for a long time. Through human history, the Greek historian Herodotus reported that, in order to receive a share in the spoils of war, Scythian warriors, a nomadic people then located to the north and west of the Black Sea, were required to deliver an enemy scalp to the king. Other sources indicate the Anglo-Saxons and Franks practiced scalping through much of the 9th century. Archaeologists examining Native American skeletons near the Illinois River reported that a skull was found to have wounds from scalping. This skeleton dated from the Middle Mississippian culture, usually dated between the years 800 to 15. A study published by Plains Anthropologist revealed ancient remains in Nebraska, showing that people were scalped, and likely some survived with massive infections, all predating the arrival of Europeans. It seems clear from a historical standpoint that scalping as a practice had been occurring throughout North America among many nations. On the Crow Creek battle location, where Sioux and Kodiak people are believed to have fought, archaeologists from the University of South Dakota found the remains of at least 486 people. The battle took place between the years 13 and 14. Many of the dead were scalped. While not every Native American nation practiced scalping, many did. Scalps represented power and status, and the act of scalping had been tied to spiritual beliefs about the afterlife and the transfer of power. Great significance was placed on scalping an enemy. Young warriors would be eager to take their first scalp in combat, showing their braveness and skill. The same went for older and experienced warriors. Having many scalps would be proof of battles fought for their people. Warriors would often wear scalps of their enemies, put them on their horses, or display them in the village, in their teepees and lodges, or around them. Once a scalp had been collected, it represented a fallen enemy. This way, scalps were used to track how many enemies were killed. Not only men were scalped in combat. Taking a woman's or child's scalp was considered honorable because it signified that the warrior had dared to enter the very heart of the enemy's territory. Native Americans are very fond of their hair. Many tribes consider human hair as a root of personal, spiritual power and even the nest of the soul. The capture of one's soul by scalping had major spiritual importance. Other cases have been reported in which the fresh scalp has been offered as a sacrifice to supernatural beings. In the eastern woodlands especially, some tribes favored the famous Mohawk or Mohican haircut, which leaves a lock of hair or roach on an otherwise shaved head, by sending a visual message of one's courage. This was done as a taunt to their enemies, as heads with such haircut could be scalped easier. There are some descriptions of how fellow tribes treated the survivors of scalping. This was different depending on the tribe. According to these, some were kept as outcasts or even considered ghosts, and to whom a return to tribal community was prohibited. Others instead were treated with great respect, as these individuals were seen as touched by the spirits. On the other hand, thanks to later testimonies in the 1800s, we have a pretty detailed description. How is it to be scalped? There is a story of one Josiah Wilbarger, who was attacked by the Comanche near modern Austin, Texas. He was shot with arrows and was scalped, but he managed to survive. Wilbarger described the sensation of having his scalp removed as surprisingly painless. He compared it to the sound of the distant roar of thunder. As European colonizers arrived and met native people, they were shown this practice. The first French written description dates to 1535. Sometime later, French artist Jacques Fersmoine witnessed the Timucuans' practice of scalping on the St. Johns River in Florida. He wrote they carried slips of reeds, sharper than any steel blade. They cut the skin of the head down to the bone, from front to back and all the way around, and pulled it off while the hair, more than 1.5 feet long, was still attached to it when they had done this. They dug a hole in the ground and made a fire, kindling it with a piece of smoldering ember. Over the fire, they dried the scalps until they looked like parchment. They hung the bones and the scalps at the ends of their spears, carrying them home in triumph. When they arrived at their village, they held a victory ceremony in which the legs, arms, and scalps of the vanquished were attached to poles, with great solemnities. When the English met the Powhatan Confederacy in today's Virginia, the natives used an old tactic to try to quash their audacity. In 1608, they showed the English 24 scalps they took. When attacking an enemy tribe, the first Dutchmen to see scalps in North America were the ones who traveled to Iroquois territory in the 1634. The Spanish also were introduced to the practice, but they knew of similar practices from South America. European colonization of North America increased intertribal conflicts, which consequently led to an increase in the practice of scalping. Europeans commercialized the act of scalping. They would pay their native allies for scalps from other tribes initially. The payments were in material things and later in money amongst many conflicts at the time. There were 6 wars fought, with New England and the Iroquois Confederacy on one side, fighting New France and the Wabanaki Confederacy, over a 75-year period, starting with King William's War in 1688. All sides scalped victims, including non-combatants during this frontier warfare. Bounty policies, originally intended only for Native Americans, were extended to enemy colonists. Various European colonizers scalped Native American people from at least the 1700s. It was a way to provide proof that someone killed a Native American person. Colonial powers paid bounties to people who turned in scalps of killed Native Americans. As an example, colonial governments in New England issued over 60 scalp bounties from the 1680s through the 1750s, typically during various conflicts between colonists and Native Americans. Massachusetts made the widest use of scalp bounties among the New England colonies. Massachusetts' Stainton governor issued one of the most notorious scalp bounty declarations in 1775. This declaration, called the Spencer-Phipps Proclamation of 1755, provides a glimpse into how this system worked. The reward was about $12,000 in today's worth for the scalp of a man, half of that for a woman's scalp. The amount was slightly less for a child. Colonizers who killed indigenous people were sometimes rewarded with land, in addition to money expanding settlers' reach, while displacing natives from their ancestral lands. Such things were done on the whole frontier. During the American Revolution, scalping, while regarded as a savage, native practice by the colonizers, even if they practiced it too, sometimes emerged as a valuable tool for both sides. Following in the footsteps of the colonial wars, patriots and loyalists directly encouraged their native allies and used scalping themselves as a means to terrorize their enemies, whether that enemy be a native Englishman or American. At the same time, each side claimed that their enemy's use of scalping proved that the opposed cause embodied native savagery. The same happened in the War of 1812. In the 1800s, during the Apache-Mexican Wars, Mexican states of Sonora and Chihuahua paid bounties for Apache scalps, while Apaches also scalped Mexicans. These bounties attracted settlers, runaway slaves, and even other Native Americans. In 1851, the Taima Massacre occurred in California. The United States Army and citizens scalped hundreds of indigenous men, women, and children. Scalping also occurred during the Sand Creek Massacre on November 29, 1864, when a 700-man force of U.S. Army volunteers destroyed a village of Cheyenne and Arapaho in southeastern Colorado Territory, killing and mutilating an estimated 70 to 163 Native Americans. There are few well-documented scalping survivor stories. One of them is the story of Robert McGee. In 1864, McGee's family set to travel west in search for a better life. Their destination was Leavenworth, Kansas. They joined a wagon train that journeyed through the rugged terrain. Along the way, Robert's parents succumbed to the harsh conditions. Leaving him orphaned, Robert arrived at Fort Leavenworth, hoping to enlist in the Army, but he was declined because he was only 14. He ended up finding employment with a freight company that transported supplies to Fort Union in New Mexico during the summer of 1864. Robert McGee became a teamster for a wagon train organized by the freight company. They also had the added protection of a U.S. Army escort. On July 18th, fatigued from the heat, they decided to make camp near Walnut Creek, a mile away from the Army. That evening they were attacked by Sioux warriors, led by Chief Little Turtle. Sioux warriors overwhelmed the unprepared teamsters, killed and scalped them, and looted the wagons. Between 8 and 14 settlers died. Robert McGee had been wounded, but survived and was still conscious. With a deliberate stroke, Chief Little Turtle cut a large chunk of scalp and hair from Robert's head, 64 square inches beginning just behind his ears. The warriors left him for dead, but he survived and was picked up by the Army. He slowly regained his health and ultimately made a full recovery. Over time, the practice of scalping eventually diminished as conflicts between settlers, the Army, and Native American tribes stopped. Today, scalping remains a reminder of how violent and harsh life was before our time. It is part of clashes and cultural complexities that shaped the history of North America.